I don't have any illusions that we're all going to agree on everything.
There is serious concern with respect to the agenda that was put out, but I would say at this point that really doesn't matter.
We don't need to be lectured by his ministers. We need to talk about things that matter.
Our view is very simple. We don't need to waste time for people to take sort of self-congratulatory victory laps around on things that have already happened.
So as we've been telling you, it is gearing up to be a tense First Ministers meeting here in Montreal. Some premiers frustrated with the agenda and what they say is missing from it. A lot has changed since the last time they all met. For some of them, it's their first time here. What is the strategy here? What can the Prime Minister do? What should he do? Chantal Hébert is in Montreal. Andrew Coyne is in Toronto tonight, and Chris Hall is with us this week, and he is also in Montreal tonight, where he will broadcast his show from here for the weekend. Okay, let me start with you, Chantal. What should we make of all this political posturing leading up to this meeting? You've covered a lot of these, all three of you have. Is this sort of par for the course, or is there something different here?
Well, it's par for the course on a number of fronts. The first is a Prime Minister at the end of his cycle looking at an election brings a weak hand to any First Minister's meeting. Second, in a vacuum, anything will fill the space, and this is a conference that is actually not about much of anything, except we're meeting, and the Prime Minister has lost a lot of the friends he used to have around the table. The new premiers who have fresh mandates are coming here with their chance to grab the soapbox, and absent a central theme, they're doing just that.
Well, when I talked to the Prime Minister earlier today, Andrew, he said, you know, well, at least I'm having the meetings. At least I'm here and I'm listening to them, which is what he often says, because Stephen Harper didn't have them. But at this point, I mean, is that the right thing to do, to at least meet like this, or not?
Not necessarily. You know, we've got along for many decades in this country with almost no First Minister's meetings at all. It's a relatively recent thing. It's basically theater, and it's cheap theater at that. There was an ostensible purpose for this meeting, which was they were going to discuss interprovincial trade barriers, which premiers could agree to get rid of tomorrow. And if they did, that would make a pretty productive meeting. But they don't want to get rid of those meetings. They don't, those barriers. They don't want to talk about it. So instead, we're going to talk about a lot of things in federal jurisdiction, Bill C-69 or pipelines, things that the feds can deal with perfectly well themselves. And are not going to get solved at this meeting tomorrow. So it'll be a great bun fight. The premiers will get to say a lot of harsh things about the Prime Minister. We'll in the media all pretend that these are actually genuine human emotions that are being expressed, but it's all performative.
Okay, Chris, do you agree that there's nothing of substance that will come of this, that this is all political posturing and nothing more?
Well, you know, I'd note that we're told the Prime Minister offered all the premiers a selection from the restaurant that they're dining at tonight, but he didn't have the same a la carte approach to the issues they want to discuss. So I would say that Andrew and Chantal are both right. This meeting, it's a nice time to meet prior to Christmas in a beautiful city like Montreal. But when you look at the real issues they have before them, what to do about oil prices and how do you get pipelines built, how do you work more cooperatively to get rid of these interprovincial trade barriers, which they've been talking about for as long as I've been a reporter. Those things could be solved if there was some will, but we haven't really seen it from either side. So back to the point about the timing. We have elections coming up in Alberta and Ottawa next year, federally next year. This is an opportunity for the two combatants there, Rachel Notley in particular, but Justin Trudeau, to show that he's not like his father just accused Joe Clark of being a head waiter to the provinces, but setting out what he thinks are the important topics that deal with the issues that he most cares about, Canada-U.S. relations and the opportunity to diversify our trade base away from the United States.
And no one
well, you know,
was,
yeah, go ahead, Chantal.
No one who was a Conservative premier and who was getting his or her picture taken, his in this case, on the front of Maclean's, calling himself part of a group called the Resistance, is going to come to Montreal to give the Prime Minister a win. So theater, yes, but a lot of the things that you will hear in the next year's federal campaign and over the next 6-7 months, and it's going to be politics until a Prime Minister has a French mandate. And I didn't say the Prime Minister, I said a Prime Minister.
Okay, so when I talked to him today, and it was a long conversation, but one of the things I asked him about was support for Alberta, because certainly the Premier of Alberta is coming here asking for more, looking for more. I'm not sure exactly how he'll respond, but this is what he told me a little bit earlier today. Take a listen.
We are absolutely looking at the tools we have around EI. We're looking at the tools we have around income support. We've done a number of things around that, around situations in the past, and we're going to continue to do that. And I'm also willing, of course, to sit down with Premier Notley and hear about how the federal government can be a partner in solving this solution.
But she told you she wanted you to buy rail cars, for instance.
You know, that's something we're happy to look at. If that's a proposal that she thinks is going to make a significant difference, then we're happy to look at how it works.
Andrew, I mean, you can talk about that specific answer, or you can talk about sort of the strategy that he has dealing with people who used to be a close ally. I think Rachel Notley used to be a close ally, and he has lost her for a multitude of reasons. Part is political, of course, but how should he be dealing with these particular interests that premiers seem to have?
Well, first of all, Alberta has an absolute claim to saying this is a major issue for the country, not just for Alberta. The energy sector is 6 times as large as the auto sector, for example. It's our major export industry. And there is real issues about federal jurisdiction here. So this is something the feds can actually do something about if they had the political will. On pipelines, they could revisit the decisions on Northern Gateway and Energy East. On Bill C-69, they could make that, look at the questions there about whether that's deterring the building of major resource projects. There are things they can do to assuage her that don't involve buying a bunch of railway cars, by the way. Jack Mintz, the professor from Calgary, was in the paper the other day saying, you know, the one thing we could do is relax some of the protectionist restrictions on U.S. Rail companies coming in further into Canada. There's lots of things they can do if they're prepared to make this a priority. And I don't think the Prime Minister wants to expend the political capital on that. I understand why he wouldn't, but if you're Rachel Notley, you're right to hold his feet to the fire on this.
But Chris, isn't there a danger if you say to the country, well, I've done this for Alberta, including by a pipeline, and we've talked about that before, but if you say something to Alberta, then do you not have to sort of give in to everybody's demands a little bit? Is that not the danger?
Well, Rachel Notley has already given in a lot herself. She did put a price on carbon, which is not a popular move in Alberta, which she's now rescinded because there is no pipeline to take the oil to market. To Andrew's point, oil and the energy sector is a huge contributor to the gross domestic product of the country. It is a national issue, massive job losses. And what he said to you when you spoke to him today is that he's looking to help people by maybe expanding employment insurance or enriching the program, not about how we actually deal with the issue that's led to people being laid off in the first place. The other thing, more to your point about what you give here, he's getting along, Justin Trudeau, pretty well with John Horgan in neighboring British Columbia, which is adamantly opposed to a pipeline, but just brought in a climate action plan that will help Justin Trudeau and the federal government meet the commitments they made in Paris a few years back. So to your point, yeah, it's difficult to give in too much, but at the same time, Rachel Notley has already sacrificed to try and meet her commitments to get a pipeline and has nothing to show for it in return.
If we're thinking about the next election and strategically where the Prime Minister's allies are and where they've changed, Chantal, how does that shape the way the Liberals have to approach things, given that the landscape is so different from the last time he ran?
Well, the political, like the Premier, the First Minister's landscape is different. Whether that is necessarily bad for Justin Trudeau is another issue. Chris was talking about BC. I think that the Prime Minister has managed to keep his relationship with the BC government on a rather level playing field. When people talk about Jagmeet Singh running in Burnaby, which would be ground zero of the protest against the Trans Mountain expansion, and maybe losing to the Liberals, it kind of tells you something about things not being so bad. I'm not sure it's bad for Trudeau to be running by proxy against Doug Ford in Ontario. And in Quebec, Mr. Legault is clearly not going to be lining up with the resistance of the Conservatives on pipeline or on carbon pricing. So it's a plus and a minus. I think it's policy-wise a big obstacle to progress, but politically not necessarily a bad thing for the federal Liberals.
Well, some of the people in the Prime Minister's office were saying today, whether Doug Ford walks out or not, if he were to walk out, that's not a terrible thing, really, for the Prime Minister. Andrew.
Yes, and Ford has had a rather bad week, to say the least, so no kidding, he wants to make this about something else besides that. I think running against the premiers, running against any particular premier, you can't be sure which way. It can work to your advantage. It's always nice to have a foil in politics. But if you get painted as the bad guy, if you get painted as the person who's being uncooperative, if you get, and this is maybe an issue more for liberals than conservatives, because liberals have traditionally been the party of, quote unquote, the strong federal government in relative degrees. If you can be painted as a sort of an uncaring, unfeeling, remote voice, that can hurt you. So it'll depend upon how these things play out.
If you're inviting the First Ministers here, you want to show the Canadians at large that you can work together on issues that will matter to them, and that would be the economy. It's just that none of the premiers, or at least the major premiers from Alberta, Ontario, British Columbia, Quebec, are talking about the same economic issues. They all have different issues. So if Justin Trudeau wants to take something from this, he has to be able to coalesce them around something to show, look, we are actually engaged with these issues, whether it's the oil sector, whether it's trying to make this place a new, for example, he was doing an artificial intelligence seminar today at a big convention here. These are the kinds of things that will lead to jobs of the future. But so far, I haven't seen anything that suggests that Justin Trudeau is able to rally the premiers, let alone the rest of the country, around these issues.
It's not going to be possible until after the election, because the hand is weak. I've seen those meetings where the Prime Minister shows up with no real agenda. They always turn out into what we're going to be seeing and what we've been seeing today.
But there is an agenda in the form of what it was supposed to originally be about, which is getting rid of these interprovincial trade barriers. I was a little distressed to see Rachel Notley dismissing that as fluff. I grant that oil prices and the crisis in Alberta is huge, but so is the competitiveness challenge in this country, and interprovincial trade barriers are a huge part of that. So if we're going to get serious about the challenge that we're facing from south of the border, the challenge to our economy in the long run, where we've got to have a much more productive economy if we're going to be able to pay for the aging population, this is a huge chunk of it, and that's something that the federal government absolutely should be taking leadership on.
I got to wrap it up. Okay, thanks everybody.